I was told my name meant nothing. For as long as I can remember, the world preferred me unseen. It was easier that way, for them. I moved quietly through streets that forgot my footsteps as soon as I passed, through rooms where voices never lowered enough to acknowledge I was there. I worked, I obeyed, I survived. That was all. But the letter changed everything. It arrived in the early morning, slipped under my door without a sound. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, the kind that belonged to courtrooms, lawyers, or people who didn't need to check the price before sending mail. My name was written in precise black ink, not the way friends scribble, but the way someone writes when the meaning is heavy, when the weight of truth threatens to pierce the paper. I held it for a long time, staring at the seal, a crest I had never seen before, embossed in gold. My fingers hesitated before breaking it, as though whatever was inside could reach out and take me somewhere I wasn't ready to go. But when I finally opened it, the air in my apartment seemed to shift. Inside was not a single sheet, but several. The first was a letter, dated 2 weeks earlier, from a law firm whose name I recognized only from distant headlines. It stated, in a voice cold and formal, that I had been named in the will of one Elias Thorne, a man I did not know, a man whose wealth was the stuff of city myth. His name appeared on towers, foundations, old photographs in the City Hall rotunda. I read it twice before my hands began to shake. Then I saw the others, a certified copy of the will's relevant pages, and a photograph. The photograph was old, but not faded. It showed a man with sharp eyes and a faint, reluctant smile. Beside him stood a woman I recognized instantly. My mother, younger, unburdened, but unmistakable. In her arms was a baby. My baby self. I could barely breathe. My mother never spoke of my father. Whenever I asked, her face would close like a door in a storm. "He's gone," she'd say, and nothing more. I had learned not to push. But now, with that photograph in my trembling hands, the silence was cracking. The letter ended with instructions. I was to appear at the reading of the will in 2 weeks. The days that followed were unreal. My work at the warehouse blurred into shadow. The people around me felt like strangers speaking in a language I no longer understood. I began noticing how the city's wealth was carved into marble lobbies, into men's shoes that cost more than my rent, into the way they did not look at people like me. I thought of Elias Thorne, the man whose blood was apparently in my veins. I thought of the years I spent watching buses pass, wishing for something, not riches, but recognition. The knowledge that I existed, that someone, somewhere, saw me. 2 weeks later, I stood in the marble lobby of Thorne and Vale, the law firm that bore his name. I was wearing my best shirt, ironed the night before until the steam burned my fingers. The room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. They were all there, his family. I knew them from the news, the society pages, the smug way their portraits hung in museums. The eldest son, Gregory, in an expensive suit the color of wet stone. The daughters, Helena and Miriam, both wearing that faintly bored look of people accustomed to being photographed. Beside them, wives, husbands, cousins, a whole constellation of comfort and entitlement. When I entered, their eyes found me. A flicker of confusion passed among them, then something sharper. Dismissal. I was no one, or so they thought. The lawyer, an older man with silver hair and a careful voice, began the proceedings. He read the formalities, the charitable bequests, the distribution of properties. Their faces remained still. They already knew what was coming, or so they thought. Then the lawyer paused, his eyes lifted from the paper to me. "And finally," he said, "as per the express instructions of the late Mr. Elias Thorne, a portion of the estate, along with certain personal effects, shall be transferred to his son." A deliberate pause. Mr. Nathaniel Cole. The silence was immediate and violent. Chairs shifted. A cousin stifled a laugh. Gregory's jaw tightened. My what? Helena's voice cut the air. Son, the lawyer repeated, sliding the photograph onto the table. The same one I had been holding in my apartment 2 weeks before. Then he placed down a sealed envelope, which he said contained a letter written by Elias to me, along with official birth records bearing his signature. I felt their eyes on me, weighing, measuring, searching for proof in my face. Gregory leaned forward, his voice low but dripping with disdain. This is absurd. That, he gestured toward me with a hand too practiced in insult, cannot be my father's son. The lawyer's hand was steady as he pushed forward the documents. The records are authentic. They have been verified by independent authorities. Helena stood, her heels clicking against the marble. This is a mistake, a cruel mistake. But the papers lay there, undeniable. And the will, witnessed and sealed, carried the truth they could no longer bury. I did not speak, not yet. My silence was a kind of shield. Inside, my thoughts churned, not of their money, but of my mother, who had lived and died in a small apartment without ever telling me that the man in the photograph was my father. Why had she hidden it? To protect me from them, or to protect herself from the storm I was now walking into? When the reading ended, the family spilled into hushed arguments. Gregory approached me, his smile tight. You think you belong here? You think a name in a document changes who you are? I met his gaze. I don't think, I said. I know. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth, spoken after a lifetime of swallowing silence. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. It began simply, My son. If you are reading this, it means I have failed to do in life what I now attempt in death, to acknowledge you before the world, without shame or denial. The letter was long, filled with regret and explanations. He spoke of my mother's strength, of the cruelty of his own family, of the fear that kept him silent. He admitted that he had watched from afar, ensuring I was safe but never daring to step forward. He had been a coward, he said, and this, the will, the public naming, was the only act of courage he had left. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully and set it beside the photograph. My hands were steady now. I understood something then. This was not just an inheritance of property or wealth. It was an inheritance of truth. And truth was the one thing the Thorne family had never been able to buy, bend, or bury. And that, I thought, would be the real battle. In the days that followed, the city seemed to whisper differently around me. Not with warmth. No, the streets didn't suddenly open their arms to welcome me. But there was a subtle shift, like the low hum of a current beneath dark water. My name had been spoken aloud in that marble room. And once a name is spoken, it cannot be unsaid. The Thornes, however, were not the kind of people who surrendered to documents or law. They moved like shadows in expensive tailoring, their power stitched into the fabric of the city. I felt it almost immediately, the way eyes followed me in places they hadn't before, the sense of being measured for removal. It was Gregory who made the first move. 3 nights after the will reading, he appeared outside my building. The streetlight above flickered, catching the gleam of his cufflinks as he stepped toward me. He didn't raise his voice. People like him didn't need to. His words carried weight because they were meant to. You've made a spectacle of yourself, he said, and of my father's name. Your father's name, I replied evenly, is also mine. For a moment, something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the polished veneer of someone used to winning without lifting a hand. You have no idea what you've stepped into, he said. We are not the kind of family you walk into from the street. Then maybe, I said, you're not the kind of family worth belonging to. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but a tightening, as if my words had lodged somewhere he didn't want to admit. Without another word, he stepped back into his waiting car, the door closing with the quiet finality of wealth. That night, I lay awake thinking about my mother. She had raised me without luxury, without the illusion of safety that money can buy, but she had given me something rarer, a spine that didn't bow easily. I wondered if she had imagined this moment, if she had ever feared that truth, once uncovered, would demand more of me than I could give. The next morning, an envelope was slipped under my door. No seal this time, just my name typed in a mechanical font. Inside were copies of articles, old scandals involving the Thorne family, whispered lawsuits, accusations buried before they could reach daylight. A note was paper-clipped to the top. They will destroy you if they can. Be ready. No signature. It was not a threat. It was a warning. I kept my head down, but not my eyes. I began to understand the unspoken economy of their world, the way favors and silences were traded like currency, the way power rested not only in what people said, but in what they could prevent from ever being said. Then came the luncheon. I had been invited, though invited was too generous a word. The lawyer had urged me to attend, saying it would smooth the transition. In truth, it felt more like a test, to see if I could be molded, or failing that, broken. The restaurant was one of those old establishments that had never changed its wallpaper, because it had never needed to. The Thornes were already seated when I arrived, their posture impeccable, their voices low. As I approached, conversation paused. Helena gestured to an empty chair, the smile on her face brittle enough to cut glass. Nathaniel. We were just discussing the importance of appearances. I sat without speaking. Gregory poured wine into my glass without looking at me. You've caused quite a stir, he said. The press is curious. They always are when something unexpected happens. I'm not here to entertain the press, I replied. No, Miriam said, her tone deceptively gentle. You're here to... What? Claim a life that was never yours? Wear our name like a suit that doesn't fit? I let the words settle before answering. The name fits just fine. What doesn't fit, I said, meeting her eyes, is the idea that you get to decide who belongs. The table went quiet. I could feel the tension pulling at the air, stretching it thin. Then Helena laughed, not with humor, but with the relief of someone puncturing a silence too heavy to bear. You have spirit, she said, but spirit doesn't survive long in our world without allies. It was an offer, disguised as a warning. I thanked them for the meal, stood, and left before dessert. Outside, the winter light was fading, and the city's cold pressed against my skin. I realized then that their true power wasn't in their money. It was in their ability to make you doubt your own place in the world. But I had something they didn't. Proof. The photograph, the records, the will, they were more than documents. They were anchors in a storm of denial. And I knew, if the time came, I could show them to the world in a way that could not be ignored. The time came sooner than I thought. 2 weeks later, a society magazine ran a small speculative piece, The Illegitimate Heir. It was designed to wound without bleeding. No outright lies, just enough implication to make the truth seem like scandal. My name was there, printed in black and white, framed by phrases like claims to inheritance and unverified parentage. It was a game, and I understood the rules now. If I stayed silent, the rumor would grow. If I spoke without proof, I would be dismissed. The only option was to reveal everything, publicly, indisputably, and so I did. I arranged for the lawyer to release the full set of documents, along with the letter from Elias himself. We chose the most public forum available, the annual Thorne Foundation Gala, where the city's elite gathered under chandeliers to toast their own generosity. When I walked into the ballroom that night, I felt every eye turned toward me. Gregory was at the far end of the room, already watching, his expression unreadable. Helena's smile froze when she saw the folder in my hand. I waited until the speeches began, until the microphone was warm with the sound of their own self-praise. Then I stepped forward. "I have something to add," I said, my voice carrying just enough to cut through the polite murmur. I opened the folder and laid the documents on the podium, the photograph, the certified birth records, the letter printed large enough to read. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This," I said, "is the truth. For years it was hidden, but tonight it stands here in the open. Elias Thorne was my father. He wrote these words himself. He signed these records himself, and he named me, without hesitation, in his will. Not for money, though the estate is his to give, but for recognition, for dignity, for the truth that no amount of wealth can purchase or erase." I let the silence hang. Then I stepped back from the podium and left the stage. Behind me, the room had changed. Not in warmth. The Thorns would not welcome me in that instant, but in weight. A balance had shifted. The truth was no longer a secret they could control. The night of the gala stayed with me like a taste that would not leave my mouth. Not bitter, not sweet. Something else entirely. The flavor of air after a storm, when the world feels briefly stripped of its disguises. In the days that followed, there was no grand applause, no sudden embrace from the family whose blood ran in my veins. Instead, there was silence. Not the absence of noise, but a purposeful quiet, as if they were gathering themselves in the dark, deciding how to proceed. The press was less restrained. Headlines bloomed across newspapers and online feeds. Hidden Heir steps forward. Elias Thorne's secret son revealed. Some wrote with curiosity, others with suspicion, but all of them wrote my name, a name now tangled with theirs, whether they liked it or not. I went about my days quietly, working when I could, though I felt the old life peeling away, bit by bit. At the corner store, strangers stared a moment too long. At the warehouse, a coworker slapped the paper down in front of me with a grin. "Didn't think you had it in you," he said. I smiled faintly, but didn't answer. It wasn't about having it in me. It was about letting it out. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick cream envelope, not from the lawyer this time, but from Helena herself. The handwriting was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Inside was a single page. "You have made your point. Now, for your own sake, leave it at that. If you insist on forcing yourself into our world, you will find it far less welcoming than you imagine." No signature. None was needed. I stared at the words for a long time. They were not a threat in the obvious sense. People like Helena didn't deal in obviousness. They were an attempt to plant doubt, to make me wonder if I was safer in the shadows. But safety was not my pursuit. Truth was. The following week, the lawyer called. There was to be a formal family meeting, not for reconciliation, but for what they called final arrangements concerning the estate. I knew enough now to read the subtext. They were preparing to draw the lines in ink, to define where I did and did not stand. It was held in the Thorne family's ancestral home, a mansion set back from the road, its gates black iron and tall enough to keep out more than intruders. The stone facade bore the marks of age, but not of neglect. It was the kind of place where time itself seemed curated, controlled. Inside, the air was scented faintly with old wood and something floral, though not sweet. The family was already gathered in the great hall, their faces arranged into polite neutrality. Gregory spoke first. "You've had your moment," he said, as though I had borrowed something that now needed returning. "We are prepared to honor Father's will as it stands. But beyond that, there is nothing for you here." I looked around the room, at the portraits lining the walls, faces of men and women who had built this empire, generation after generation. None of them would have recognized me, and yet here I was, part of their story, whether they acknowledged it or not. "You speak," I said slowly, "as if I'm here to be granted permission. I'm not. I'm here because the truth already exists, whether you welcome it or not." Helena's gaze sharpened. "You think truth is enough? In this family, survival is not about what is true. It is about what is remembered." "Then remember this," I said. "Your father remembered me, and that memory will outlast your approval." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then Miriam, who had spoken little until now, leaned forward. "What is it you want, really? Money? A title? Or the satisfaction of humiliating us?" "None of those," I said. "I want what my mother never had, acknowledgement. That her life, my life, mattered to him. That the blood you guard so fiercely runs in me too. Nothing more. Nothing less." Gregory's expression was unreadable, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not acceptance, but perhaps the faintest glimmer of understanding. The meeting ended without ceremony. They had not welcomed me in, but neither had they erased me. And in their world, that was a kind of victory. As I left the mansion, the evening sky was heavy with the promise of snow. I thought of my mother again, of the nights she had sat by the window while I slept, watching storms roll in. She had faced her life with quiet dignity, never asking for more than she had, yet carrying truths too heavy to share. I carried them now, but I carried them openly. Weeks passed. The city moved on to new headlines, new scandals. The Thorns retreated into their carefully guarded lives. I returned to mine, but it was no longer the same. There was a weight to my steps now, not of burden, but of grounding. One afternoon, as I walked past a small photography shop I had never noticed before, something in the window caught my eye. It was an old camera, the kind my mother once owned when I was a child. The sight of it brought a sudden, sharp ache. Inside, I spoke with the shopkeeper, a man with gentle hands who handled each camera as if it were alive. He told me the one in the window still worked, still had the capacity to capture the light of the present and hold it in the amber of memory. I bought it. That night, I took it to my apartment and placed it beside the photograph of my parents. I thought about the power of images, how one photograph had shifted the course of my life. Proof, once seen, cannot be unseen. It struck me then that my inheritance was not the money, not even the name, but the ability to be visible, to exist without asking for permission. And in that quiet realization, I understood that the Thorns could neither grant nor take away the thing I had fought for. Still, the story was not finished. It was nearly spring when the last turning point came. The city was shedding its winter skin, light returning to the streets in long golden hours. I had begun to settle into a quieter rhythm. Worked in the mornings, walks in the afternoons, the old camera slung over my shoulder like a companion. One day, I received a call from the lawyer. There was one final matter regarding the estate, something that had been overlooked. His voice carried that careful neutrality I had come to recognize. The kind people use when the truth they're about to deliver has weight. I met him in his office, the same place where I had first heard my name spoken in connection to Elias Thorne. This time, there was only one folder on the table. "This," he said, sliding it toward me, "was in a private safe of your father's. It was not part of the will itself, but he left instructions for it to be given to you personally. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were filled in a steady, deliberate hand. I began to read. It was not a ledger, nor a list of possessions. It was a record of moments. The first entry was dated the year I was born. Saw him today, through the window of the small flat on Mercer Street. He was sleeping in her arms. I could not go in, but I could not leave without looking." Entry after entry, he had documented glimpses. A birthday from a distance, the first day of school, a time he had followed me discreetly to make sure I got home safe when the neighborhood grew tense. There were regrets woven through the pages, but also pride. A father's pride, quiet and unseen. By the last entry, his handwriting had grown weaker. If these words reach you, it means I am gone. I have given you what I can, not in gold, but in truth. You are my son, and nothing they say or do can take that away. I closed the journal, my throat tight. It was strange. All my life I had believed I had been invisible to him. Now I saw that he had been there in the shadows, choosing the safety of distance over the risk of scandal. A choice I still wrestled with, but one I now understood was not born of indifference. The next time the Thorns called for a family discussion, I brought the journal with me. It was not for them, but for myself. A reminder, as I stepped once again into their world, of why I was there. They had gathered in a smaller salon this time, the walls lined with books that looked untouched. Gregory opened the meeting with a tone that was almost measured. "The estate matters are concluded," he said. "We will not contest father's wishes any further." I waited for the but. It didn't come. Instead, Helena spoke. "We may never agree on how this came about, but you are, as the documents say, one of us. That is not a door we can close." It was not warmth. It was not acceptance in the way most people would hope for. But in their language, it was something, a public acknowledgement that they could not undo. "I don't need your approval," I said quietly. "I only need you to remember that my mother's life mattered, that my life matters, that your father saw me." Gregory nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. The conversation shifted to practical matters. I listened. I responded when needed, but inside I was elsewhere, with my mother, with my father's words in that journal, with the truth that had been locked away for so long. When I left the mansion, I did not look back. That evening, I took the camera out to the city's waterfront. The air was cool, the sky streaked with fading light. I lifted the camera and began to take photographs. Strangers walking, gulls wheeling overhead, the way the water caught the last fire of the day. Each click was an act of proof that this moment existed, that I was here. Months later, a small gallery agreed to display my photographs. I didn't tell them about the inheritance, the will, or the family whose name I carried. The images spoke for themselves. Quiet, unposed fragments of truth. On the opening night, I stood in the corner, watching people move from frame to frame. I wondered if my father had ever imagined this, his son's work hanging in a space where strangers would stand still to see. Near the end of the evening, a woman approached me. She was older, her hair silver, her voice soft. "These," she said, gesturing to the photographs, "feel dignified, like they see something most people miss." I thought of my mother's hands, steady as she held her old camera. I thought of my father's journal, each line a quiet act of seeing. "Thank you," I said. When the gallery closed, I walked home under the city's street lamps. My life was not suddenly easier. The Thorns were not suddenly family in the way fairy tales promise, but something essential had shifted. I no longer walked unseen. That was the true inheritance. Not the money, not the estate, but the recognition that I existed fully, without apology. That my story was no longer one they could rewrite. And in the quiet of my apartment, I placed the photograph, the letter, and the journal together on a shelf. A small altar, not to wealth, but to truth. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent, alive, endless. But for the first time in a long time, I moved with it. And that was enough.